Hello everyone, I am Akshay. Today I am here to explain Task 6.1p, which is Authentication and Authorization of Unit SIT331, which is Full Stack Development Secure Backend Services. So let's begin. Starting with, let's see that what this task is and what this task wants us to do. So in this task, we have to further work on the previous task, and this time we have to develop an API for robot controller system in which there should be user management and should have authorization and authentication cases. As here, we have to add authentication to have security to our endpoints, as the user have to provide their email and password, which should be encrypted and supports the CRUD operations, which are create, retrieve, update and delete for both map, robot commands and users. So this was the brief overview of this task. Now let's take a brief look on my codes. First of all, if we talk about basic authentication handler.cs, then this is used to implement the authentication. It is an authentication method to be used in HTTP protocol. Here, it is used to send username and password for each endpoint, which is encoded with base64 string. So, firstly, the systems.security.claim contains the classes that claims an entity. These claims are commonly used to make authorization decisions. Now, this is used for encoding the formats. Then, this Microsoft.ASP.NET Core authorization contains the type which are used for authentication and authentication middlewares. Now, this authorization is used to configure authorization services. This provides interfaces and classes for logging. It is used to retrieve options that represents configuration of data. Now, this contains model classes to represent the data structures, and it contains classes which are responsible for data access. Now here I had defined the basic authentication handler class that is inherited from authentication handler, and here I had made a constructor to initialize the handler with required services. Next here I had overridden the handle authentication asynchronous method, which is inherited from authentication handle. Here this checks that which endpoint is being accessed at the moment. Then in this if statement, it checks that if the allow anonymous attribute is there for the endpoint, as if the user can access it without authentication. Now next, here it is checked that if the request contains authorization header with basic authentication, it decodes the credentials from authorization header. Now here it splits the decoded credential into email and password. Then it is used to retrieve the user from the database by using provided email. Next, if the user is not found, then the authentication will fail. Now next, I had used pcrypt to verify that the password which is provided matches the stored password in the database or not. And if the verification fails, then the authentication will also be failed. Now next, I had used claims, as here I had created claims which contains user information like their name and role. Now here I had made an authentication tickets with claim. Next here I had returned the authenticate result.success with the authentication tickets that if the authentication is successful. Lastly, if the authentication fails, then this authentication result.fail returns the result. So this was all about the basic authentication handler.cs. Now next, if we talk about login method.cs, then this class is used for representing the login credentials within the robot underscore controller underscore API namespace, as here I had stored the two variables email and password with get and set property to read and write. Next, in userModel.cs, it is used for user data within the robot controller API namespace. Here I had initialized various variables such as ID, email, and so on with respect to the information of users. Then I had made user model constructor to initialize all the properties of user model class. Then I had also made a default constructor to create instance of class without providing initial values to its properties. Now, next, if we talk about user-data-access.cs, then it is responsible for interacting the users with database, performing the CRUD operations. As first of all, I had included all these needed libraries. Then I had used this connection string which contains all the credentials needed to build the connection with the database. Now below, I had made all the methods. If we talk about getAllUser method, then it is used to retrieve all user records from the database. Here, I had used npg SQL connection from npg SQL library to make connection with the database. Then this open function is used to open the connection with the database. Here, I had used this npg SQL command to execute SQL commands on Postgre database. Next, this execute reader is used to read the SQL query which is here. Then I had made this list for storing the flexible user information. Next, in this while loop, this read function is used to read the condition that either it is true or false. As if the condition is true, then this will be executed. Otherwise, the user will be returned. Now all these functions are used by all the remaining endpoints. Next, the addUser method is used to create a new user. Here I had used addWithValue method, which add the user attributes. Next, this getUser by email is used to retrieve a user record by their email address. Then this getUser by ID is used to retrieve the record of users with the help of their unique ID. This deleteUser by ID deletes the user and their record using the delete query. Then this updateUser is used to update a user record by their ID with the provided user data. Now this update data only updates the user email and password with the help of their ID. So this was all about user-data-access.cs. Now, next, if we talk about user-controller.cs, then it is used for handling the HTTP request related to users in API. As first of all, I had used system.linq to provide the interfaces and classes that supports query to use language integrated query. Then I had used this bcrypt.net to provide hashing using the bcrypt algorithm for security. Then it supports authorization in ASP.NET Core. Next, this is used for creating and handling the HTTP request. Then it contains user model and login model classes which are used in controllers. So here I had used this namespace and then inherited the user controller class from controller base. Now I had made all the endpoints here which are related to users, same as user-data-access.cs, but here I had used the authorize policy, as it is used to specify that the access of this HTTP GET is restricted for the users. Only the admins have the access to view it. And next, this HTTP GET is an action method used to retrieve data from a list of all users. I had used this policy to all the endpoints except this add new user method, because from here we can add the users who can access the endpoint, and if that one is not accessible, then the users that need access were unable to add them. I had put it the conditions for verifying the users. Also, in the add user, I had used this statement that if the user is null, then bad request will be returned with the message. Same thing I had done for existing users. Now next, I had used this to hash the password provided in the new user. Password hash using the bcrypt's hash password method to secure the password in the database. Then here I had created the user model object which have all the properties of user model. Rest in all the endpoints I had used the statements same as it. So this was the brief explanation of usercontroller.cs. Next, if we talk about the other files which are mapcontroller.cs, robotcommandcontroller.cs, mapdataaccess.cs, robotcommand.data-access.cs, map.cs, robotcommand.cs, and program.cs, then all these files are almost same as the previous task, but here are few changes in these files as we have to apply the authorization and authentication. So if we talk about map.cs and robotcommand.cs, then these files are same as in these files I had only initialized the variables and constructors. But now if we talk about mapcontroller.cs, then I had added this Microsoft.ASP.NET Core authorization library to use the authorization policy. As here we can see that I had used this authorize policy for admins to all the endpoints that only the existing user can view them, which is of admin role. Rest I had made the methods only which I had made in the previous task. Now if we talk about the robotcommandcontroller.cs, then here also I had done the same thing as I had included this authorization library and included the authorization policy to all the endpoints. Rest this file is also same. Next, both of these files mapdataaccess.cs and robotcommandaccess.cs remain same. And lastly, in program.cs, I had included the system.security.claims and ASP.NET Core authentication library to use interfaces and classes related to authentication and claims. Then I had used add authentication to use authentication and add basic authentication. Then I had used add authorization to add authorization policies. I had added two policies for admins and users. Then I had configured the middleware for authentication and authorization using use authentication and use authorization. So this was all the things which I had added in program.cs for adding the authorization and authentication. So this was the explanation of my program codes of task 6.1p. Now let's check the output of my code. So as we can see that our application is built successfully. Now let's open the Postman. These are all the requests which I had made for this task. And these are all the requests for robot commands and maps. As these were all the user requests from which we can create, retrieve, update and delete the users. Now let's test them one by one. First of all, in user request, if we try to get the users, then we will not be able to get them. For that, we have to be authorized, as here we can see that we are unauthorized. Now we have to add a new user for this, as while explaining the code, I had told that I did not use policy to this request, as we have to add a new user. So Now let's add a new user. Now we can see that the user Akshay is added successfully with a role of admin. Now if we try to get all the users, then we can see that we are able to fetch them all. Now let's check the get admin. Here we can see that if I put a wrong password, then we become unauthorized. Now after putting the correct credentials, we can see that we are able to access it. Let's add some more users with admin and user roles. As we can see that if I try to get all the users with a user who have user role, then we will not be able to get this. But with the help of admin role, we will able to get them. Now here, let's try to check the users with admin role only. As we can see that here, the two users which I had created with admin role. Now let's try to get the user by ID. Now we can see that no user is present with ID 1. Now let's check it with ID number 10. As we can see that it got appeared because it is present here. Now let's try to update the user description with ID 10. We can see that it got successfully updated. Now let's try to get users with updated Akshay with user role. We can see that it got unauthorized. But if we try to get with other admin such as Akshay1, which I had created earlier, then we are able to fetch them all. Now let's try to delete this user. We can see that the user gets successfully deleted. Now let's get it. Now we will change the user credentials like email and password of ID 11, which is Akshay1. Now here we can see that it got successfully updated. Now let's try to check it on other endpoints. We can see that the updated user is working perfectly. Let's try to check all the robot command requests. As we can see that all the robot commands are working perfectly with the admin credentials. Now let's check the maps too. So, maps are also working fine with authorization. Now let's check the updating in Azure Data Studio also. We can see that both our tables are updated with the actions which we had made. All the user table, the robot command table and map table are updated. Now let's check the updation of the tables practically. As we can see that the tables are also updated successfully with respect to our actions. So this was all about the demonstration of task 6.1p. Thank you very much.